we may be cartoons and animation and sometimes goofy characters, but they can be expressing great truths at the same time.
Hi, and welcome to the Hollywood Reporter's Animation Roundtable. And joining me today are Josh Cooley, director of Paramount Pictures' Transformers 1, Kelsey Mann, director of the Pixar movie Inside Out 2, Dana Ledoux Miller, one of the directors of Disney's Moana 2, Morgan Neville, the director of the animated documentary Piece by Piece from Focus Features, Nick Park, co-director of the Netflix claymation film Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Fowl, and Chris Saunders, the director of Universal Pictures' The Wild Robot. Can I first say, before we start this, thank you so much for your movies. Watching these films has been an absolute joy. It is just sort of pure joy that comes out of all of your movies. Even though they deal with some quite serious and difficult subjects, there's such a deep humanity, I think, in all of your films. And obviously a really great love of cinema. What was the film that made you want to become a filmmaker?
There's animated and then there's film. I would say that film, probably It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Yeah, what a movie. Just everything in camera, people, flying airplanes through billboards. And I think the greatest performance by, oh my gosh, the guy, it's going to slip on my, Thurston Howell.
Jim Backus.
Jim Backus.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. The old-fashioned scene in the airplane with Mickey Rooney. Holy mackerel.
If I have a core memory, it's definitely from Star Wars because I saw it when I was 5. I remember sitting in the front row and just being blown away. And I think that might be one of my earliest memories.
I mean, I'll just jump in. I remember my earliest memory of seeing a movie was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I remember walking the theater. It just blew my mind. And, I wasn't thinking about making movies at the time, but it's funny because I brought that movie up and I even refer to that movie in the movie I just made. So it's something that somehow comes full circle.
I'd say Princess Bride is probably one of the first films I saw that really just changed the way I thought about storytelling, even really young. It was just so fun and so exciting. And I think it really just got me excited about watching movies, but also The Little Mermaid. And I know I'm in the house of Disney right now. I swear they're not telling me I have to say this. The Little Mermaid, I grew up with The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and The Lion King. That was like the sweet spot for me as a kid. And so I just remember seeing those films in the theater and wanting to be in those stories.
I was just getting into doing my own stop motion animation as a kid on 8mm. And I saw for the first time Jason and the Argonauts, Ray Harryhausen, and those creatures coming to life and the skeleton fight and everything.
For me, the film that made me want to be a filmmaker was Roger Rabbit. I loved that movie. It hit just the right moment for me. Before that, the very first memory I have at the theater actually was watching E.T. And I remember it so strongly because it was the first time I really felt something emotional from watching the big screen. And then I looked over to my dad and I remember seeing him cry. And I think it was like the very first time and one of the only times I ever remember seeing him actually really cry. So it was really powerful.
Chris, can I ask you with The Wild Robot? I mean, what was the sort of core idea at the center of that story that spoke to you, that made you want to turn it into a feature?
Peter Brown's book. It all centers around a lost robot, which of course is I love robots. And the idea of a robot that doesn't even know it's lost is just really charming. And first and foremost, compelling. Compelling for me is the word. Nothing needs to be relatable. There's a lot of stuff that ended up being incredibly relatable about the story. But for me, it's compelling. The cherry at the center of the whole thing of that chocolate was the mom story. I never get to work on things like that because, as we know, moms are frequently absent from these situations just because they have to be. When I started on Aladdin, there was a mom in the story. And there were several reasons that we had to write her out of the story because, first of all, she knows better. When Aladdin's getting ready to go and I'm going to go to the market and steal stuff, she'd be like, no, of course you're not. Oh, no, you're not. Moms know better. In the best way possible, moms keep adventures from happening. We also had to check in with her. And that just was sad. We would check in and she's looking for her son and he's off having this amazing adventure. And so she had to exit the story. So the idea that the Wild Robot had at its very core a mom was for me a really intriguing and compelling challenge.
Josh, can I ask, was it robots that drove you to Transformers 1? Or, I mean, this is your first film outside of Pixar because you were with Pixar for almost 20 years, I guess.
I love the idea that this was totally different from all the other Transformers films because it was only on Cybertron. There's no humans involved, so it allowed all the character to come right out of the characters that I grew up watching. But it was all about this relationship between the two main characters, just being they're going from friends to enemies, and I just loved the kind of simplicity of that. But I also loved how that's a theme that runs through just some of the big classic films, Ben-Hur, Spartacus, Ten Commandments. I just love epics like that. And so I was thinking, if this is a chance to do a sci-fi film on another planet, but to have this big epic story with a really personal human relationship, the most human kind of story ever told with these characters. And that got me really excited. So I had to take the opportunity to do it.
And can I just say, thank you, but no thank you, because my kids loved your movie, and I ended up having to make Transformer costumes for Halloween this year.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness.
And they actually transform. So they were a big hit, but I've never worked so hard in my life.
Oh, I want to see that. You got to share that. That's awesome.
Dana, for you, this is your first, Moana 2 is your first feature as a director, right? I mean, that must have been a big challenge, also taking on such a beloved story. What did you want to, hold on to from Moana, the first film, and what did you want to sort of expand on or transform with your movie?
The first film, I will say, really changed my life in a lot of ways. It was the first time, not only that we'd had a Disney princess like Moana, but that I'm Samoan, so we never had a Polynesian superstar like this that was a woman. And so really, I remember watching that film and thinking that Moana was going to change the way I got to walk into rooms and pitch stories. I didn't know 8 years ago that I would be part of telling her story. And so to get to jump in, I actually co-wrote the live action as well. So that I was working on that as I jumped into the sequel. And so her story was very fresh in my head. But that first film is really about her connecting to her past and finding herself, which in a lot of ways it helped me do. And so if that was about connecting to the past, I really thought about what it would mean for a young woman who had just become a leader of her community. Like, what's the next step of that? When you think you know who you are, you don't ever just settle in that moment. You keep evolving and you keep changing as your circumstances change. So really started thinking about this next story as the story of what she wants for the future of her people. She's connected them to who they were. She kind of knows who she is. And now she has to look towards the future and decide not only what kind of legacy she wants to leave behind, but what she wants to push them towards, what new boundaries that they can cross. And so in a story that feels so complete because it's a musical in the first film, without reinventing that entire journey that she went on, it really focused on making sure that she was still growing and not changing the fundamental core of who she is, but expanding on that. No easy feat, especially when you do it in 13 months, but I'm really
Nick, can I ask you? I mean, obviously, Wallace and Gromit have been with you almost from the beginning of your career in animation, but you haven't revisited these characters in a feature in almost 20 years. I know you've spoken a little bit about making the first Wallace and Gromit feature and some of the challenges of fitting the very British story that you create making it inside the studio system, as you did with the DreamWorks film that you made, the Curse of the Were-Rabbit. What was the experience like making this film? And did you face some similar challenges under Netflix as you did with this movie?
Strangely, it was incredibly quick to make. It was 15 months shooting. The guys at Netflix were very respectful of the Wallace and Gromit legacy and like you say, the kind of Britishness of it. We were aware that the language, we couldn't be totally, the accents couldn't be totally, sort of obscure. And so we had to be a bit more sensitive. We didn't want to have subtitles for the English-speaking audiences. The notes were really good, generally, and they were fairly hands-off and respectful. Yeah, so it went very well. But they did give Aram Yakubian at Netflix gave very astute notes, and it did help us quite a bit. So, yeah.
And how did it play? I know you premiered it in America at the AFI. How did it play in front of an American audience? Did they laugh at the right places, or were there a lot of puzzled silence?
Yeah, I was scared that would happen, but it went down really well, actually. What I'm totally surprised, constantly surprised by is, we try it here in Bristol in our little studio in little England, to make films that are true to ourselves, and have our own voice. And in that, I'm surprised how universal that can be. And so, I mean, the American audience was very responsive.
The idea of telling the story, the story of Pharrell Williams as an animation, as Lego animation. I mean, why do that? Why tell the story through animation? And what did that allow you to do? And maybe tell the story more truly than it would have been possible in a sort of traditional documentary form.
Well, in looking back over the films I've made, so many of them have been about creativity and the creative process. It's something that I find constantly interesting and baffling. And I think of people's creativity as their own kind of superpower. And Pharrell was somebody who was so creative in so many ways that I wanted to ask a lot of questions about, because he has grappled with his own kind of balancing his creative instincts with the world that's telling you otherwise, whether you're too weird or you're too mainstream or whatever. And I feel like the questions I was asking were the questions I was asking myself. I mean, these films tend to be therapeutic in different ways. This absolutely was of me trying to work out my own issues and talking about how to balance creativity with the industry. But really doing it in Lego became a chance for it not to just be about creativity, but to be a creative act itself. Like, how do we invent a new type of hybrid film in a way? I think we constantly felt like we were trying to figure out the grammar of what we could do in a film like this. And it was incredibly exciting. I felt like we kept opening doors and being like, oh, yeah, we can do this. And so part of it has one foot in the kind of documentary world, and it's kind of rooted in that. But then we completely jumped away from that as much as we could. And I think that was both not, incredibly fun for me to do and interesting, but also I think reflective of Pharrell too, because he's kind of a magical thinker. And the fact that the idea was literally came from him in the first conversation I had with him. So it felt, organic to him. And in a way, at this point, I don't think this film could exist not in Lego. I don't think there's another version of this film. I think it can only exist in this world. So it was an amazing journey to go on.
I have a question about that because I saw the film. It's amazing. You visualize sound so incredibly well. And because he speaks about how he has synesthesia and he can see color, or he sees the music. And so it's a very visual thing. How would you have done that without Lego?
I say, I don't know how you could. I mean, So again, if you're doing, you guys know as animators, everything you can do, but when all the possibilities, but normally when your main character has synesthesia, where they see color when they hear sound, you couldn't do that in a documentary, and you could maybe do it in a scripted way, but in animation, it feels totally organic. And it became one of these great keys into why we're doing it this way. And I went to Pharrell, and we not only see the synesthesia, but every beat he makes becomes a physical object.
Mm-hmm.
And those objects, I could ask Pharrell and I'd say, what does this beat look like? What's the color of this beat? And he would tell me. So all the beats and colors in the film are accurate to the colors he sees in his head. Like, there's no fact checking it otherwise, but they are how he sees the sounds. So in that way, it was like a gift to think about doing it in this style.
Kelsey, can I ask with Inside Out 2? Now, this is your first feature, animated feature as a director. How terrifying was it to have this as your first feature? Probably more weight. I mean, the weight put on this film. I think Pete Docter even said, if it doesn't work, we're going to have to change everything about how we work in Pixar, because who knows what's happening in the industry. How was it to have the entire weight of this animation industry on your shoulders for opening weekend?
All of us here, when we make these movies, there's so much pressure that's put on every single one of us that's on here, especially trying to make something, great. And definitely with this film, initially Pete Docter, he directed the original film. He's our chief creative officer at the studio. He's the one that first came to me and asked me about this. And I felt a lot of excitement and joy, to be honest, at the beginning, because I honestly never thought I'd ever get this chance to direct a movie really anywhere, but let alone at Pixar. It took me a long time even to get in the doors of Pixar as a story artist. It took me a long time, even after I graduated college. It took me like 10 years of trying to work in the industry and try to get in. So once I finally got in, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to retire a Pixar story artist, and I'd be incredibly happy with that. And I never thought I'd get the opportunity, let alone to be a story supervisor, and certainly not a director. So when he asked me, I was very excited about it. But then soon, Scott, you're totally right. The weight of it all kind of hit me too. It's funny looking back on. You never know when you're making these movies. You kind of put yourself in them, and sometimes when you have enough distance, you look back, and you're like, oh wow, that I put that in there, but I didn't really realize that was something I was dealing with. Like looking now that the movie is done and out there, I think about what I was feeling at the beginning, and I was definitely feeling joy and a lot of overwhelming anxiety during this project. And I'm like, wow, I put that on the screen. Like it's really a battle between my joy and anxiety, which is kind of the entire run of this movie, was making this. I honestly remember, Scott, I remember very early on making a conscious decision to make sure that I had joy in the driver's seat as much as possible making this movie. One of the first decisions I had to make is outside my story room. There's a little plaque where you can put a little picture that says Kelsey Mann story room. I'm like, what am I going to put out there? And I remember thinking about what I want to feel when I walk through the door every day into my story room, because it's kind of a scary room because it's blank and empty. I'm like, I want to walk in with a sense of excitement and joy. And I thought, if I told my younger self, 8-year-old, 10-year-old Kelsey, that I would get this opportunity, that kid would feel nothing but excitement and joy. So I put a little picture of me, smiling 8-year-old Kelsey. And I knew that he'd have a chance of making a movie that was good, because I wanted to make something that's obviously very emotional and moving. I want to make a fun movie. And if I'm not having fun, the crew won't have fun. And I really believe in what the crew feels ends up on the screen. And so I wanted to make sure that I was making a fun movie that people would want to watch over and over again. So I had to remind myself to invite joy to my own console so that I can make the best movie I can.
Actually, I want to jump in because Kelsey and I had an impromptu conversation at SCAD, and where we talked about just like being present and like for me it was like resetting myself before every meeting, just to make sure be there, like every one of these things is really important. Now I'm going to get maybe in trouble here, but I'm going to share that. You should. This is wait.
Oh my God. Okay, you guys, this is awesome. So there's Chris and I. Okay, remember, I applied to Pixar in 2000 and I got rejected. And I'm like, damn it, I got to work on my stuff and I got to get better. So I moved to LA. I worked at tiny little studios and I took night classes and weekend classes. And that photo that Chris just shared was a class that I took at the Animation Academy. And I think it might have been for storyboarding. And Chris and Dean came as to do a talk one night, and I was so excited to meet them. You can see I was a big of a nerd that I was like, would you take a picture with me? And so that's Chris and I, Dean, circa, I don't know, 2002 or something. What we get to do is so cool, and life can be so giving and surprising. That we end up on a call like this, all making movies together. It's just a wonderful kind of life that we get to live.
As said at the very beginning, I think the joy in all of your films really, really is on the screen and really comes out. But what I also find really compelling about all the movies is that there's also, it isn't just light and happiness and sunshine. There's a lot of complicated issues and darkness as well in your films. How difficult is it to get that balance and also to introduce some of these themes into what are often seen as kids movies? I mean, maybe Josh, for you, for me, it's almost most surprising in Transformers One some of the issues you managed to get into that film, issues of class consciousness, or fake news, or the civil rights. I mean, there's a lot of issues in there. How challenging was it to get that balance and even to bring these things into a film that most people would consider, oh, this is a kid's movie?
I never think of I'm making a movie for kids. I always go, I want to make a movie for selfishly for myself that I would enjoy, that I think other people would enjoy. And I want to make a movie that's something that's approachable for everybody. So taking Transformers and putting it on their planet, I needed to relate their world to ours as much as possible because it is so foreign. And because they are underdogs and they don't have the ability to transform at first, that immediately puts them in a lower class. And so classism kind of came out of just working on the story and then having, a leader who's in a position to form that class structure. So I wouldn't say that I set out going, I'm going to talk about this theme and this theme and this theme and this. Like it kind of just gradually grew out of the idea of being on this other planet and seeing the society. But also, we started this movie in 2020, and literally my first day on the movie was when the world shut down. So it was like there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to bring from our own story here into the film. And so I just wanted to make a film that was approachable for everyone, and that, but also not just something that's, is just a babysitter, a virtual babysitter. I wanted to actually talk about stuff.
Are there certain issues that studios will just reject out of hand when it comes to animation, or if sort of family-friendly films that say we're not going to touch that?
I mean, I don't know about you, Kelsey, but that wasn't my experience at all. I think this is also my first animated project ever. So this was a totally new system to me, and I wasn't sure what to expect when I walked in. Walking into Disney animation, I think I had this sense of like the bigness of it, but what I found was actually a very, very small process in the best possible way, in that I walked in that first day and we were talking about character and story, and really at every point in the process, no matter where we were, I was pretty struck by how that always dominated. And it was really just about building a story that felt natural coming out of Moana, and it ended up being deeply personal as well. Like Kelsey was saying, it's like I didn't set out to tell a story about myself growing up and what it means as the world changes all around you, but it became that. And I think, in that way, everyone here was really supportive of it. Everything just kind of grew naturally. And I there was at no point someone saying, you can't tell that this is a children's story. But I think also we have incredible artists here. We're working with Eric Goldberg and Amy Smead Lawson and this incredible story team who they understand the assignment when you're coming in and telling a Disney story. But at no point were we ever like, we're going to speak down to our audience. We're going to tell the story that feels truest to who this young woman is and how she's growing. And everything that comes out of that just sort of fell naturally. I think we're really fortunate in that way. But there weren't a lot of parameters. Like, I don't ever feel like there was some big bad telling me what story I had to tell. It was like, find the best story from Moana and we'll find a way to make it work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like everyone here, no one here has made a movie that talked down to kids. Every single one of us here, like it's all really made for everybody. And Dana, I had the same experience. Like I don't really have anybody giving me any notes saying I can't do that. It's all everything's just focused on the story and what story that you're telling. And your notes, I find all my notes that I get come from that angle. Everybody has the same goal. It's one of the things I love about working at Pixar. Everybody has the same goal: make a great film. Mm-hmm. The only time I got nervous is when we started. I knew I was going to tell a movie about anxiety, and panic attacks were always kind of a part of that. It wasn't in the beginning. In our first few versions of the film, we didn't really have that kind of element at the end of the film. But when we started to lean into that of like, what if we have Riley experience a panic attack at the end of the film? You want to take the characters to a place where there's a lot of stakes. And we're like, that would be pretty high stakes for Riley, certainly emotionally and physically too. There's an element of that too. I was a little nervous. I'm like, am I going to get into trouble? Are people going to tell me you can't do that? That's too far. Not in a kid's film. And I'll be honest, I didn't get it once. Not one person. It was more about making sure we got it right. That was my notes that I got versus you shouldn't do that at all. So I found that no resistance in the same way that Dana's talking about. It was all about telling a great story.
Let me just say, because I was dealing with so much real world stuff, that we have a scene of a Black Lives Matter scene in Lego that we had a lot of debate about, and like, how much do we show and not show. There's another scene, this is the real world stuff, so it gets edgy. I think there's the first Lego drug deal that's ever been done in a film. And of course, drug use. And, we had lots of debates over what a thong would be on a Lego minifig, and had to redo those for the MPA. We knew we weren't going to animate things like Snoop Dogg with a Lego joint, but we had to come up with ways in all these instances that adults would understand it in a certain context, but kids could see it and it would work for them, but they wouldn't necessarily have to understand everything that was told within that. So a lot of it was really just trying to find a balance that worked on two different levels.
Yeah, I think he worked to not exclude. I was fortunate enough to start this whole thing with, I was on the story crew with Brenda Chapman and Joe Ranft in particular, on Beauty and the Beast. And that was like the first intensive time that I had where I was on a story crew from start to finish. And I think that one thing that never, ever would come up in the room is, in the best way possible, the audience. Exactly what I think Kelsey was touching on is that I think there's a collective understanding of a tone that you're operating within. But as long as you're thoughtful about what you're saying and how you're delivering it, I should say, not even what you're saying, but how you're delivering it, you can tell, I'm absolutely convinced, you can tell any story about any subject. It can be hard stuff, as long as you're just conscious of how you're delivering it. And you're not excluding any part of your audience. And just like watching how Joe would he would hit a wall and he would flow around it. He was so just like, there was an ease with which and a joy really with which he approached doing story, that it just, like, I would sometimes go home just feeling like we're done. We're done for. We'll never get around this. We'll never get around this obstacle. We're stuck. And Joe would come in the next day and just so happy and just flow around it and find another avenue. And I never forgot that, especially when you're in the midst of a great crew. And I think we all have had that experience working with just people who are just so ingenious, but like work well in a room. And if you don't have the answer, somebody's going to help you out with it, right? It's like a playground. It's like a playground has a fence around it, and you've got some edges to it, and you go all the way to the fence. And once in a while, especially when it comes to humor, you might find a little weak place in the fence. You can go a little bit beyond, and just push things just a little bit. You might break the rules just a little bit to get a gag. But yeah, I think like just getting all the way to the edge of and to find the depth of each of these different stories emotionally, and never shying away from that. I think that's one thing that animation in particular does really, really well. Perhaps it is just because it's a collective that really adopts these things, and you live and you breathe them every day. Like some of my, I think, most successful, bits of writing didn't come while I was at the office. It came while I was sitting on an airplane or riding a bike. Or a lot of times just watching another movie. One of the things I will always go to movies while I'm working on a movie, because it kind of, even though it can have nothing to do with what I'm working on, I can go to see a horror film or a drama or a documentary, but it just reminds you of what a film is. A film is audacious. It's fearless. And yeah, so I think that the audience is just, it is primarily, I think, us in a way.
Obviously, things are changing incredibly rapidly, particularly in animation when it comes to AI. How do you, in general, view it? I mean, are you sort of terrified? Are you excited by what's happening? How do you view the sort of very near future?
I don't know much about it. I do know that you do need to feed it something in order to get something out of it, and that can be called stealing sometimes, I think. And so I don't agree with that part, but what I do know is that you're only going to get what you put into it. And if that means that we're getting the same kind of regurgitated stuff back at us, that's going to force us to make even better movies that are more exciting. And so that's what gets me excited. I think about like Everything Everywhere All at Once. No computer could have made that. That's insane. And same thing with like Long Legs, even. Like there's just stuff that I love that's just so new and original that I know that can only come from people. So that's what I get excited about.
I completely agree. But on top of that, like there's so much of every great film that we love comes out of a happy accident. It's two people working in a room. It's in our case, we have Minnie Maui who's hand drawn on CG. It's this complicated process that works because we're in a room trying to figure out whether it's one frame higher or one frame down, and suddenly we have a joke that we didn't have before. And I think that, I'm a person, as a writer, I write by hand because my brain thinks at the speed of my pencil, not at the computer. And so it's like an invaluable process that I think even when you get into animation, you think you have a joke, but it's not funny until you put it on its feet. And AI can't predict that for you.
While we were working on Lilo and Stitch, I visited Becker Boards, and I actually saw Mr. Becker shaping a board. I was in the room while he was like foam was flying around like snow, and I asked the question like can't a machine like do this now? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. Machines can carve one of these out in a split second, but they're not the ones that people want. They don't have, and there's no question. He said there's absolutely no question that like they are soulless things that are mass produced and they just don't work as well. And I have to 100% agree with what you just said. Like, if anything, I feel like it's going to find a spot somewhere. It's going to find a place like maybe it roughs something out for you, but and maybe when it comes to like a surfboard, a rough shape, sure, let it knock something out here and there. Like it'll find its place in the process, but the idea that it would be able to do the kind of stuff you're just talking about, and like one of the wonderful things about doing this tour that I've been doing, talking about making this movie, is I've been able to talk a lot about editorial and what happens in editorial, and people are very confused by that, especially when it comes to animation. And so it's like the hub of the story wheel. So much of that comes from just sitting there and having your head of story and your editor and a few other people just working a problem. And I agree with the happy accident thing. Like these things, in fact, at the end of the process, sometimes I wonder if you guys ever feel like this. I look back at just happenstance and think like a guy said something in a meeting once that just was the key to the ending of our film in some ways. And if I just think, oh my God, if he had been busy that day and hadn't been in the room and said that one thing, what would have become of our, it's, holy Toledo.
Documentary is, living in the real world, which is a world of, unpredictability, and I love Orson Welles' description of a director as someone who presides over accidents. And I kind of love that, and embracing the accident, and in documentary, we absolutely embrace it. And I think a big part of me on this journey with this film was working with animators who aren't used to accidents in the same way. Yes, in the story department, but not necessarily in the visualization of it, and really trying to keep the chaos there. In the visual storytelling, the accidents, keeping the accidents in the film, literally putting shots out of focus on purpose, because that's what happens in documentary sometimes. So, but to the bigger point, I think that, I was talking to a composer friend of mine who was showing me these new AI apps, and he said this is probably going to erase 50% of composer work. And I think what we're all talking about, which is like making real handcrafted art, is absolutely a value. I worry more about the taste of people, and that are people going to care about the difference? I think they absolutely will for films like the ones we're working on. But I think if you just want to go home at the end of the day and have AI generate a new episode of Golden Girls for you or something, that might be fine, even if it's just mediocre. I do worry about just the kind of the pablum that AI will generate going forward.
there probably will be a reaction like against it too. That people will like. I mean, I think about the resurgence of like vinyl. You know, that like there'll be a whole thing where people will be into it just because it's like made by somebody. You know, I feel like there'll be a desire and a want. I'm sure there'll still be people who want stuff that's created by AI, but there'll be a whole bunch of people that will want the opposite. And kind of like one of my favorite things about Nick, your film is seeing the fingerprints in the clay. I love that, and I think people want more of that. For my film, like it's doing an Inside Out movie. It's a movie that's all about emotions. I really believe that you need to be able to feel them in order to make a movie about them. So I can't see an AI Inside Out movie would be terrible.
And would AI ever understand in writing? Would it ever understand irony and absurdity?
Yeah.
I may be wrong. Maybe it will. I don't know. But,
Well, we had an interesting experience with the Wild Robot where it's not AI exactly. The whole thing of AI kind of arose while we were in the midst of finishing the film, and it certainly wasn't around when the book was written. But technology allowed us to get people back into the process. In our case, we had backgrounds that were 100% painted by people, just like Lion King, just like Lilo and Stitch. And we haven't had that for a long, long time, decades. People have reacted so positively to the vibe of the movie. And I think largely because there's such an immense amount of humanity just like poured into every background. You absolutely feel it. As I was working on the film, I became very habituated to the look of it because I saw it every day, and I was wondering, like, will other people see this? Like, and am I attuned to it because I'm so deeply entrenched in animation, and I'm so attuned to all these little nuances and things, and I look at it all the time, and look at different animation, and big fan of Bambi, Miyazaki, all those things. Will other people see it? Like, will a general audience? And absolutely, they did. They absolutely felt it, and it came through, and that gave me a lot of hope for, again, like the human element being present in these things. It absolutely made the whole thing like way more resonant and way more effective than it would have been had we made this even a few years ago.
Josh, maybe you could jump on this because I found it really interesting what you did, because you obviously were working from a little bit of a template that is decades and decades old, your first Transformers movie. But it seems what you've done visually is so interesting and so grand as well. I'd be interested to know what your sort of inspiration was, sort of your visual inspiration for the style of the movie, because it seems like as well CGI film, but you seem to be doing something that's quite handmade in some ways.
Yeah, there was the CG metal looks amazing in CG, right? The lighting can do wonders, and it just looks so realistic. And that they've been doing that with the last 9 Transformers films. Everything looks so great on our planet, and alongside real people. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do a super realistic movie. I wanted it to. The word I kept using was believable. I wanted it to be a film that you watch and you believe that these things exist, but you could reach out and touch it, but it's not super realistic. And that did allow it to have a little bit more warmth to it. We had Jason Shire, production designer. We worked on developing a look along with ILM that had a little bit of a, we always say the word, hand quality, like the artist's hand in it a little bit. We looked at a lot of J.C. Leindecker's paintings, and just to get, I love how his paintings just look so strong and almost like statuesque, but they're still very, very warm and very, very human. And so we took, some advantage of that along with Art Deco, and tried to put as much humanity into the characters as much so they didn't feel like cold robots. I wanted them to actually have some human qualities in there. But and that, just to talk about it as an industry as a whole, I feel like, post Spider-Verse, I think everybody realized like, oh, we can do something different now. And the audience is actually looking for something different. And it's not just the same CG look that we're doing over and over again. I love that the technology is actually advanced so we can push it and do new stuff like Wild Robot and just and even Lego movies now, and just to make things feel different and just to push the storytelling even further.
Dana, can I ask, every time I talk to CGI artists, they always mention water as the absolute horror for CGI. You've decided to make a movie that's 90% water, at least 3/4 water, like the planet? I mean,
it's
what
more
was
water than the
the
first
biggest
film.
challenge for that? For was it the water, or was there something else that really sort of pushed you to the edge in terms of what you could express visually on screen?
Thankfully, the same people that kind of pushed the boundaries of what water could be in an animated film in the first one were the same people making this film. So it's come a long way in 8 years. And water was, and they are FX artists, might kill me for saying this, but that was like the least of our problems on this film. Really, when we started thinking about what we wanted Moana to go up against, she'd already fought a lava monster in the first film, and all of our villains within the Moana universe are based on nature. And so I was like, well, why doesn't she go up against a hurricane? So not only is she on water, now she's on a monster storm that has 8 tornadoes coming out of the sky and 3 giant ones and an eye of a storm that is, cursed by the gods. So lightning, water spouts, a storm. We have something like 50, 60-foot waves that they have to go up against in the midst of this storm. A little water and a canoe on the water, that was like nothing to us. There was definitely a point not very long ago when I did not think we would figure out how to make the tornadoes work on the water in a way that felt like they were sentient beings that were attacking this canoe on the ocean. I really don't think that we've seen anything like the storm that we ended up creating. We just got to see it at the Dolby Theater the other day, and it was like, it feels like it lives up to the promise of what Moana should go up against, and that's a testament to our effects artists who created new tech, new sims, new everything just to make this possible. I like a challenge, and so I was like, let's push the boundaries. Moana can't go against something smaller. She has to go bigger. And a hurricane felt right.
And Nick, your water is actually seems like a big challenge in this film, in your film as well, because there's that huge last third of the film, which is all sort of this massive water escape. Was that a major challenge to do that in actual claymation form? Because I had never seen anything like that in a stop motion movie.
It was very challenging, and we had a great VFX team, as Dana was saying. And for me, being not too into how, I don't really understand how stuff is generated, so it's still very much witchcraft. But it's like having a genie in a stop motion film and asking for so many wishes. I was always like wondering how many wishes we had left. Because I understand the stop motion bit, but yeah, even putting water, because there's a canal chase. And what we've got to be very careful of is that it matches the stop motion, that it doesn't, that it sits well, so they would do things like maybe double frame it or make it slightly less fluid, or so it doesn't seem like live action water grafted on. So yeah, so they still had to animate in a stop motion kind of way.
And Kelsey, I mean, what was the biggest technical challenge for you guys in making Inside Out 2?
I'll tell you the biggest surprise to me, the first Inside Out, 9 years ago, and the technology had changed so much, because I thought like, hey, get Joy out of storage, get the digital model, bring it on up, let's go. Things have changed it's so quick. They had to start completely over with Joy. Sat all 5 of the original emotions. They had to start from scratch because a lot had changed. Particularly, I think in shading had really changed, and they're pretty complex characters. If you look up really closely, they're made of particles that are kind of floating. And Joyce, in particular, has these particles that are kind of floating off of her, and she has all these complicated glowing that she's doing. They're really complex characters, and so he's like, we have to start from scratch. And it's going to take us a year to bring back Joy. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that it would take that much work with so many people. But it offered us the opportunity to, do an upgrade, And so we would always, when we got to a certain point, we would go, they would show me like, here's Inside Out Joy, here's Inside Out 2 Joy. And we would kind of flash kind of back and forth and try to update some things. So that took a long time by a group of talented people to get them back up. But the new emotions were just, that helped getting the technology, because you could transfer that over. all the particles for all the other characters. Then you get into a design problem then too of like, who are the new emotions? What are they like? Uh, I remember Ennui's hair being incredibly difficult because I wanted the long hair, and long hair is really hard to do in CG. So you have to be very calculated. Like if you can have one person who has long hair, I think Disgust on the first film had really long hair, and it just, you have so much time and money, you have to choose where you're going to want to spend it. And so they didn't want to spend it on Disgust, so they made it shorter. But anyway, I decided to spend it on Ennui, and they said that's great. She can have long hair just as long as she doesn't move around very much. And I'm like, well, it's Ennui. She doesn't want to do anything. She doesn't want to lift a finger. So I promise not to move her very much, and that's great for her too because she doesn't want to lift a finger.
Morgan, can I ask, because you mentioned before that you took some sort of documentary style camera movements and you have the amorphic lens and so forth into the animation. Can I ask, and just even the specific shot, there's some footage in the film, I say footage, which is home movies and stuff, VHS copied movies of Pharrell Williams and so on. How is that done in animation? How did you manage to get that look? Because it looks like an animated version of old used VHS footage. How was that done in Lego?
I mean, those are what, some of the tropes of documentaries. You have archive footage and you're jumping between aspect ratios and everything else. And I wanted to keep all that. And so we did a lot of tests about how to get that archive look, and there are all kinds of plugins you can do and things you can do in post. And we played with all that. And honestly, what we ended up doing at the end of the day is we would take the shots, the finished 4K shots, export them to VHS and re-import them. So those shots actually lived on a VHS tape and then were re-imported
awesome.
film. So, because it looked better than every, fake plugin to try and make it look like archive. We said I really want a kind of an analog quality to it. And we got it by doing that, which was crazy. And just in terms of what everybody's talking about, Lego style animation comes with kind of a rule book. We got a 130-page binder of kind of these are what you're supposed to do in Lego. And what, kind of the prevailing limitation is that everything in the film has to be buildable with something you can go buy right now, pieces you can buy right now. And, limitations or opportunities. And there were a lot of things, workarounds we had to constantly come up with, which were interesting and creative and playing with that. And the one area we really pushed Lego on was skin tone and hair, because they just didn't have it. So doing things like dreadlocks, braids, they had one skin tone for, black skin. And we ended up developing 7. We did a braid design, and they said the problem with that is it could break off and a child could choke. And we're like, well, it's a movie. And they said, but it has to be manufacturable. We have to be able to make this. And so we ended up working with their team to actually do these hairstyles, some of which they're actually manufacturing now, which is awesome. And new skin tones. Lego are actually manufacturing.
So kids will
now.
actually be able to design a Snoop Dogg without the joint, I assume. But
yeah, exactly.
There seems to be a lot of actually sort of hope and joy in all your films, and I wonder if that is how you sort of see the future. Where do you hope this field is going?
We've had an incredible year. Like, there's so many great movies that are in theaters right now and they're animated. And they've done really well in the box office. I feel like it's bringing people back into the theater. So if you want to feel the inspiration, I mean, just look at everybody here and look at every single one of the people representing the films that are here. It's an incredible time for animation. You can just feel it.
I'd agree with that. I think some of my core memories, like I said, were watching Disney movies in the theater. That's what we did. It was always a matinee. And now I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And this year we've been able to go to the movies together as a family to see all of your films. And it's been really incredible to have like that shared family experience. And it does feel like right now we're at a point where filmmakers like all of us aren't afraid to tell stories that matter and that mean something to us personally. And, our film, yes, it's about self-evolution, but at the end of the day, it's about community. Moana goes out to find other people across the ocean because she knows that building a bigger community is going to build a better future. And I think now more than ever, that sense of coming together and finding people that live a different life than you, that you can find shared connection with, feels like something that is of this moment. And I think all of us bring how we're feeling about the world and about our lives and ourselves into the work that we're doing. And I can only imagine that as, you know, life is tricky in the next couple of years, that the art is going to reflect that. And I think in a hopeful way, people want to be entertained, they want to laugh, they want to feel something. And I think that the future is bright for animation in that sense.
These are incredible films everybody's made here, all speaking to something about, the human spirit and with a positive way of looking at that in many ways. So I feel like animation is actually the most kind of timeless of storytelling. And I think that is so valuable in this day and age, to be able to make films that speak not just to ourselves, but speak to others, that share messages of human value, a way of shared vision of a community in a world we're going to live in. I think these films all do that. So, I love the work that is happening right now.
This year more than ever, I think animation has really been out there, taking the lead, I think, in entertaining people, really. And I think it's a calorie-free way of just really comforting yourself. And I agree, there's something about animation that is it's like pulling a blanket up and it hugs you, And life just seems to get more and more complex and hectic. So I think that animation in particular, I think, is just going to be playing an immensely important role. There's such a labor of love, and you sink so much time into them. But you know what? It's totally worth it, because animated films endure and they shake off age like nothing else. I don't think we can have too many of them. I just honestly think it's going to thrive.
And part of the reason it's going to thrive, I think, is because the technology that the new generation has now is insane. The fact that you can make films on your phone, that in your pocket, like if I told myself I could have done that when I was a kid, I wouldn't believe it. So my kids are, shooting videos inside their video games and then cutting them together and showing me like what they've done over the afternoon. It's crazy. So that gets me excited too, just seeing where it can go.
And I remember being inspired by Robert McKee, who said that we may not know it, but we're going to the cinema to find meaning and truth, and that's what we're all trying to do. I love that. Just on the comedy side, I love that a quote from Homer, not the old Greek one, not the Simpsons one, who said, "If it's funny, therefore it's true." And we're all, we may be cartoons and animation and sometimes goofy characters, but they can be expressing great truths at the same time. The clever thing is, I think The Simpsons actually had Homer actually saying that line in one of the.
Did they? That's awesome. Oh, well, fantastic. That's a great way. Always good to end with a punchline. That's a great place to stop. Thank you all so much for taking the time to do this. And thank you all so much for making your films. As I say, it brought incredible amount of joy to me, and I'm sure to millions and millions of others around the world. So I only say keep doing it, because I think we're going to need a lot more joy in the years to come. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.